We have any new folks here tonight? Right? I know one from Washington Township. Some new folks here tonight. How'd you hear about it? How about the program, Community Justice Academy? Thank you. It's nice to have additional folks out there helping us to advertise. I'm Annie Kern with the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, and I'm the Community Outreach Director. And we're pleased to have you here tonight. The subject tonight is CSI Indy. Who watches the shows? Tell me why you like them. Why do you like the CSI?
Science.
The science? Somebody else? Anybody else? James, do you watch them?
Yeah, I do. I just like the mystery.
The mystery. Anyone else? Anyone else? Well, I saw a lot of hands go up. Well, I'll tell you this. Tonight, we're going to distinguish between what is fact and what is myth. We've got some excellent speakers here tonight. But, and before our speakers are introduced by Deb Law. Deb Law is one of my neighbors. You know, I refer to the people in my hallway as my neighbors. Deb is a deputy prosecutor in Community Prosecution Division, and she's one of my neighbors. But before Deb introduces the speakers, the boss is here tonight, or should I say prosecutor, Terry Cruz. Wants to greet you.
I just want to stop by and say hello again. Annie had sent us pictures from last week, and I know we had a huge turnout last week. The weather's not quite as good this week, but just mention a couple things again. Number one, if you enjoy the programming, it's still a year off to next year, but plan to come back next year. We'll have different programming each year, but bring 3 or 4 of your neighbors and acquaintances and fellow club members because we feel it's beneficial to spread the word. I know the pressure is on tonight on Mike and Cindy because if you recall the first week I assured everyone that their presentation will be much more interesting than mine. And I am confident that will be the case. One last thing, please plan to come next week. I believe the subject is juvenile,
Yes,
juvenile law.
crime games.
So plan to come next week, then the 4th week, and depending on where things stand in the Officer Bassard trial, I hope to be here next Monday. But again, thanks for coming out.
Thank you. And also, before Deb comes up, I want to thank our friends with WCTY. They are taping each segment because the goal is for, as we mentioned the first night, to increase engagement to impact public safety. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is that they will prepare the videos for us to have them available on our webpage, and then also they will be showing on the government channel a week or 2 out after each session. So thank you to WCTY for doing that for us. Okay, Deb?
Okay, well, we have 2 really interesting speakers for you tonight. Our first speaker is Cindy Oetjen, who's deputy prosecutor. She's been in the office for more than 10 years. She started in our office as a domestic violence court intern, and she moved through the ranks, went to the sex crimes unit, worked on child abuse cases, sex crimes, became a supervisor, and we're really excited that this spring we stole her to the Community Prosecution Division. So we have Cindy's expertise joining us. And we also have Mike Medler, who's the director of the Marion County Forensic Services Agency. Did I get that right?
That's why you call it crime lab.
Exactly. The big name. Mike is a veteran of the Indiana State Police. He spent 29 years with State Police. He has been a pioneer in the area of forensic, investigative, and crime scene science and technology. And in 2005, he became the director of the crime lab here in Marion County, where he's in charge of an annual budget of nearly $7 million, including about $1 million in supplemental grant funding. So we have 2 experts in the area, and we hope that you enjoy tonight's presentation, the CSI Indianapolis.
Come on down.
We're going to sort of stand close to this, but we'll move around so it can be recorded properly. And thanks for having me. And Prosecutor Curry, thank you. And I'm going to go back in time a little bit to talk about the importance of community involvement as well as, the educational component of this. It's very important to me. When he was first elected prosecutor, I called, got a hold of him, and then went through some other handler. I'm just going to call it that. to say, hey, could he come over to the crime lab, and I'd like to talk about what we can do together, and how we can make improvements in the county, correct? What we can do, the crime lab, what we can do together, and what we can do to make improvements in the county. He just walked back in. And I was very appreciative of his time then, and I still am today. Now, the issue as we go through and I talk about the crime lab tonight is that we're actually neutral, meaning that science is, somebody had mentioned that they like CSI because of the science component. Science is science. You know, I'm not going to change a chemical formula that's been around forever tonight and make it say something else. It is what it is. So oftentimes when we do casework, different than on CSI, you know, on TV, first of all, you can look at me. I don't have on an Armani suit. I don't drive a Hummer, and I'm certainly not good looking. So, you know, you know, we are not that way. We can't solve those things that quickly. But science is science. We are not going to change a result, pro a defendant, oppose the defendant. We exonerate just as much when we do our science in the laboratory, forensic science, as we identify an individual. And with that said, I sort of want to bring Cindy on to talk, even before we get into the slides, a little bit about that part of what we do.
It's true. As I said, I've been a prosecutor about 10 years, and one of the things that comes up a lot of times when we're doing the questioning, or when the defense attorneys are questioning our, particularly for me, was DNA analysts. They would say, well, how do you know that, you know, what do you care about that result? Well, my DNA analyst would say, I don't care if it's there or it's not there. My only job is to say what is there. It's someone else's job to figure out when it got there, how it got there, and how it relates to the case. So unlike CSI on television, and I will tell you, I watch them all, every single one. Even Numbers, the one with the guy who used to solve things by math, I watch them all. I stop it in the middle and cuss at the television because I know how wrong it is. But it's fun and it's entertainment. So we have to understand that that's what it is. It's entertainment and it's there for that. But the science of this is that they don't care what it is or what isn't. They're just there to be objective observers and tell us what it is, and then it's our job as prosecutors or the police to figure out how that fits in with the crime. Also, like on television, prosecutors don't hang out at crime scenes either. I'm not a size 2, right? I sit in my office. I don't go out to the crime scene and figure out the crime. That's what police are for. They carry guns and they do investigations. So we have our roles in that, and that's how that works. So that's how it all comes together. They do the objective observing, and then we put it together to figure out how it works in the facts of our case.
So let's look. I was told I could just touch that. And we handed out a little handout so you can follow along. You can keep it. You can make some notes. And also, anytime during the evening you have a question, ask us as we go through it. I'd rather take your question than it not be answered this evening. We're going to give you a complete overview of what's done in the crime lab, almost per discipline. And you're going to think, man, is this going to go on forever? No. We're going to get down to about 45, 50 minutes, so you can go outside. We brought our major crime scene vehicle here for you to see. If you'd like to see it, like to go inside of it or whatever, you're going to be able to do that if you want to. Our mission statement. And I'm not going to read all that to you, but I want to focus on these 4 words: quality, integrity, accountability, and ethics. And actually, if you think about those things, they're true in your families. They're true in whatever institution you may work in, but they're certainly true in a crime lab or in a lab that does science. You know, if we don't have quality in our work, if you can't count on an answer we're giving you, the prosecutor's not going to use us or anybody else. So quality is very, very critical to what we do. Obviously, integrity of all of our people and our throughput of work. A lab's called throughput instead of production, but we do almost are in a widget type way of doing processing. We do things as efficiently as we can. We've completely process mapped our lab. Those of you who've been in industry or been involved in Six Sigma projects know that we're looking at efficiencies. We process mapped every unit in our laboratory over the last 4 years. We had it done on a federal grant. In our DNA unit, which is the first unit we process mapped, we had 1 person less than what we were supposed to have in our manning docket, but our throughput, meaning our production, increased 40%. So if you're in any institution, this whole idea of process mapping can make a whole lot of sense. Accountability, meaning people are held accountable. I tell new people that we hire, we have a lot of young folks in college who want to do this. It's sort of, if you will, neat because of that show. She watches all the time. Now, that's a very positive thing about CSI investigation show on television. It has brought us people who we never would have had. We've gotten people from industry who have PhDs, et cetera, who then say, I really would like to do that instead of being in a research lab all my life. And why? Well, I think a lot of it, when you look at our forensic scientists, they do it for one big reason. They're using science to make a difference in their community as well. To say that we're neutral, we are, but if we've had cases where one small sample from a crime scene identifies a perpetrator on a homicide, and when that one small sample is DNA, and we've had these on cold cases, you can't help but feel good that you did a good job. So, our people do, get that pat on the back, I guess, recognition. A lot of what we do is behind the scenes. I sort of tell our people we're silent warriors, we're working behind the scenes. The police officers who are out there on the street deserve the credit every day. We're in a nice, warm room. Now, our crime scene people aren't. I'll show you where they're digging for bones underneath a house here in a while, but for the most part, it doesn't have the dangers that a police officer would in doing their job. But I'm heading to the other part of this on accountability. If one of our people make an error that would be putting somebody in jail that shouldn't be in jail because of their error, what do you think is going to happen? They're probably not going to have a job. And I tell any young person that comes into this profession, it's one of the most unforgiving type of professions you can be in when it comes to making mistakes. And we're all human. We're going to make them, aren't we? We will make mistakes. So I'll talk a little bit about our accreditation program and how we have quality assurance already built into our forensic laboratory system. And the last thing is ethics. If our folks don't have ethics, if they're not doing their job right, if they're not concerned with something that may appear that's given to them that they think something's wrong with this, and they don't feel an obligation to call a prosecutor and say, hey, look, I got this stuff, and I'm not sure it was seized appropriately, meaning a search and seizure issue based on our Constitution, Fourth Amendment. That's part of our role. We're not questioning the police. One of the things, a young lady out here in our crime scene van tonight, one of the components when we go to a crime scene that's on our list of things to do is to walk over to the officer and say, do you have, what's your name? Holly. Do you have a warrant, Holly? Okay, and it's not to be mean. Do you have a warrant? Do you think I need one? Well, maybe we could call this person and find out for sure. Because if we seize things and do our work, it's gone. And, I've been around police work now, I guess, I'm pushing probably 38, 39 years in this. And oftentimes police officers, the adrenaline rush, whatever you want to call it, they get involved in things, and it's not that they're wanting to make a mistake, but because of the pressure and the stresses occurring at the time, those kind of things like getting a warrant can be forgotten. So it's always nice to have somebody you can call to make sure you do in fact need it or don't. These are the various things that we do in our crime lab. We have and another thing I should say, I did mention accreditation. I'll talk a little bit about it more in just a minute, but we're accredited through the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, and there's a slide on this later, but it sort of fits in here so I can hype up our crime scene unit a little bit. Before I retired from state police and came to this lab, the lab was already accredited under a system called Legacy. Now we're accredited even under a higher level of accreditation. It's ISO 17025, if somebody's interested in that. But this crime scene unit in this county, in this city, was the very first one in the United States of America. And you all ought to be proud of that. When we went from the old accreditation to the new, back in that was in 07, under the ISO, we were the 7th in the world. The only reason we were 7th in the world, 6 police departments in New Zealand got ahead of us on the docket, so that's important to us. And our morgue liaison unit, which is not part of our accreditation process, although they're very important in the lab, that's where we work directly with the forensic pathologist, with any deceased victim for purposes of recovering evidence photography, and I'll show you some slides here in a minute. Our firearms, tool mark, footwear, and tire tread. And I'm sure that next year when the prosecutor, you get ready for programs, we can have our firearms come out here, examiners come out here some evening and give you a thing on weapons that will probably blow your mind. But it is very interesting, especially if you're interested in science, if you're interested in engineering, how guns are made, and how then, because of the way they're made, we can make identifications based on things that occur at a crime scene. Our DNA and serology unit is also where we do, obviously you've heard of DNA. Serology is any bodily fluid, so any fluid you could think of falls in that biology overall unit. Latent fingerprints. The word latent just simply means an undeveloped, unknown print from a crime scene. That unit gets latent fingerprints that they try to identify back to a suspect. If Mike Medler's a suspect, they're trying to identify it back to me. We'll talk about that in a little while. Drug chemistry. Drug units in laboratories across the country are the most predominant part of the lab, either anywhere from 60 to 70%. Now, every time I tell that to a group of folks, whether it's fifth graders or it's adults, it's sort of sad. Because when you think about the amount of money we have to spend to control drugs in our community, 60 to 70% of that total number that was sort of thrown out here earlier in our budget goes to what we do there. And if anything, our work has increased there, not decreased. You probably read in the paper recently about some of the heroin cases where there have been heroin overdoses in the community. We see those in our lab. I've been around, like I said, a long time. I can remember, I'm not a chemist by trade, but I'm around them all the time. I can remember when if we got a heroin case that was 5 to 7%, people were jumping up and down, meaning purity level. There's other things like quinine, stuff that they can mix with the drug. 5, 7% years ago, that was great. A narcotics officer would go out and spend money on it, they'd prosecute, etc. Today we're seeing stuff on average 50% most of the time. We've seen some 90 and 100%ers. Now, that will kill someone. And obviously, when it's about money, people do all sorts of things. So that unit isn't going away. Trust me, even though marijuana in some states have been legalized and so forth, it's not going away. We also have synthetic drugs that are the bath salts, you've heard of it. It gets more complicated in that unit all the time.
And then I just saw something about this crocodile that's coming over from Asia and it's eating people from the inside out.
Yeah, that's a so-called, they call it crocodiles. The technical name is different than that, but I won't go into that. Yeah, it's a form actually of heroin that's flesh eating. And yeah, and it is in this country. It wasn't, the first time they saw it was about 2 years ago. It was in Russia, but now it's here. And there have been several cases on the West Coast. I believe there was a case in the Midwest here, whether it was Chicago or whatever recently.
I think I just talked to an officer from Illinois who was in Illinois.
Okay, so yeah, it's remember the technology we have to figure these things out. There's also, what's that show, Breaking Bad? There are people out there that are doing things on the other side, and much of it is driven by money. Trace chemistry could also be referred to as microanalysis. Some labs call it that. So trace anything small, hairs, fibers, plastic, glass, anything small. Our trace unit also does, we have toxicology located in there. We do blood alcohol on blood from people involved in OWI, DWI type offenses. We do not do drugs on blood or urine. And the reason we don't have a toxicologist on staff to testify. A toxicologist can testify to the impairment level of an individual based on the amount of substance in their body. Our people are chemists. They can do the testing, testify on the results, but they can't testify on the toxicology end of it. Matter of fact, in cases, oftentimes the prosecutor's office will have to hire a toxicologist to come in and talk about impairment. And the reason we don't have a toxicologist on staff, they don't have to hire, meaning the prosecutor's office, a toxicologist very often. Because generally, if I've been drinking and driving, I know I've been drinking and driving, okay? And when my blood alcohol comes up as to what it is, generally I'm probably gonna take a plea agreement or something like that instead of going through all that other stuff. And we also do arson in our trace chemistry unit, so any accelerants are done in that particular unit. We were heavily involved, obviously, in the Southside explosion. Forensic documents. Forensic documents are question documents. So somebody steals a check and puts your name on it when it's them. We look at those. Counterfeit bills, counterfeit driver's license, all those kind of things. And then digital analysis is where we enhance video. Actually, when you go to a speedway station and you've seen on television, that we're looking for this guy. That's an enhanced video from one of those cameras, and we do that as well.
Question.
Yes.
Do you have subject matter experts in each one of those?
Yes.
Are they specific to that subject, or are they kind of generalists?
Very good question. They're not generalists. They're specific to that particular subject matter. It's not like TV where I go work the crime scene, bring the DNA evidence in, do the DNA analysis, do the anthropology, and go to court and testify on it. Those are not. That doesn't work in the real world. One of the things I'd leave you with, I was going to wait till the end, but I'll tell you now, related to CSI. Forensic science is not going to McDonald's. It's not fast like that. You can't drive through and get it. Forensic science like going to the longest gourmet meal you've ever had. And because science is science, it just takes so long to get an answer. And then you may get an answer, you may not get any answer, and then guess what you do? You run it over again. Yeah. Oftentimes in the DNA world, and our people have testified to this, she's had people on the stand, we run something 4 times, not gotten anything, and thought, we're going to run that again. And guess what? There it is. Now, you talk to DNA experts, why didn't they get anything those first 3 or 4 times? There's no explanation for that, except it just didn't work. I mean, there's no scientific explanation. It didn't work. It could have been that a reagent was weak or something, and that can be an explanation, but not always. I know we've had cases where we've been down to the last item of evidence on a case. We ran it a couple times, and we haven't gotten anything on this case, and we run it once more, and bingo, we have it. And trust me, our people are going to exhaust all opportunities on these kind of things. You've had them on the stand, especially in sexual assault cases, is oftentimes where this occurs.
Right. The other side of that, hold on,
You go.
The other
You
side
go.
of that is, one thing is that if you have say you have for a sexual assault, right? So it's my big deal. An item of clothing, like a pair of underwear, and you may swab one part of that underwear, and that's not where the evidence is. Then you swab it again, and you may get the spot where it is, depending on how small it is. Used to be they needed large amounts or large quantities of DNA to get a testing result, and now it's down to just nanometer. I mean, they just need a small amount of DNA, and then they replicate it. But it just depends on where they swab to. It can be any number of reasons why. But we do continue on. And one thing that we do, especially in the area of DNA related to sex crimes, is we start with the most intimate items. So we start with the items that are closest to you, like the swabs that are taken from the woman's body or the man's body, and then we move out from there. So we start with what would be the most important spot first, and then we don't test everything. So if it was on a bed, we start with the underwear. We don't go to the sheets. If it's not on the underwear, then we would move to the sheets, so that you're not wasting all of that time doing that. So they're also very particular about how and in what order we look at the specimens, so that we're using our resources wisely and efficiently, and when we're examining the evidence.
And again, as Cindy said, and it goes back to how we sort of started about collaboration, cooperation, and education, because a big component in that whole process are the same nurses, the sexual assault nurse examiners, who have to be trained on how to collect that evidence, both from the body and the clothing, and to do it in an appropriate manner, and to have someone that, if they got a question, they can call and rely on, whether it's us in the lab or there could be a prosecution question. So this isn't, as TV portrays, a one-stop shop. There's a lot of people working on these all at the same time. I've already said this, but forensic science is used to identify suspects and exonerate the innocent. And I'd say probably one of the most things that's been publicized over the last several years is the Innocence Project, with the number of people who have been in prison, many of them related to sexual assault offenses, who have been exonerated due to DNA. And that will continue. Now, does that mean that the juries were wrong then? The juries used the information they had at the time, okay? And that will continue. But as Cindy said, we're looking at things, 1 swab, 2 swabs, 3 swabs, but just to give you an example of how technology has really, really continued to advance. You can go back and Google this. There's a company out in Utah, it's called MVAC, M-VAC. And actually, that particular company was their equipment. Picture, the little spray nozzle on your sink at home where you rinse your dishes. Okay, picture a little device like that, with sort of a backpack like the guys in Ghostbusters. That dates me to the Ghostbusters backpack that are running around with, and that they were able to spray. And it also has a suction type head that is a one usage, because you can't contaminate. where you can use that on an item to wet it down. It draws all that liquid off, and then from that liquid we can look at a potential DNA profile. We've done some testing on this. They're highly expensive right now, but let me tell you the utility. Out in Utah, and because it's the devices there, in Salt Lake City about 27 years ago, and if you go Google this, you'll find it. I can't remember the suspect's name, but if you type in 17-year-old prostitute in Salt Lake City, Utah, death investigation, cold case, you'll find it. She was murdered, and she was bludgeoned with a rock, but there was no blood on the rock, okay? And they tested this like 5 times. They'd swabbed it in labs, the whole thing. Somebody got the idea, why don't we use this MVAC on it, see if we can extract the liquid, and see if we can get a profile. Bingo. They got a hit on a child molester that had been convicted 20 years ago, who was living with his mother now in Florida. And some of you may have read that article. They went knocking on the door and said, hey, guess what, Joe? And my understanding is he gave it up, he's confessed and so forth. But my point is, that just goes to show how technology today is different than it was years ago. So when this happens, please give your criminal justice partners, and I'll say that, the advantage of saying, why didn't they do that 25 years ago? It didn't exist then. And a lot of things that you see in the news today that sort of relies a doubt, why wasn't that done then? We didn't have that. And we have those kind of things today. As she mentioned, in the old days, the first things that were, the type of science that was used for DNA is nothing like we use today. It took a minimum of 300 nanograms. A minimum. You know how much we need today? 1. We'd like to have more than that, but you realize how small that is? That's very small for those that don't understand. Okay, if you got a packet of equal and you're putting it in your coffee and you spill those out, take one of those grains away and then maybe cut that down about 100 times, and you might have an antibody. It's so very, very small. Okay, move on, or I'll get talking and we won't get done. What would we have without science? If you didn't have science, what would happen in the courtroom? Difficulty in proving a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm going to show you another slide here in a minute that proves this out. More reliance on eyewitness testimony. How reliable, anybody in this room know, how reliable is eyewitness testimony? What percentage is it wrong? Anybody know, based on studies? 75% of the time it's oftentimes wrong. That's some of the studies that have been done nationally. That's true. It's just like if I were to have Jim stand up here in front of the class and give you about 15 seconds to look at Jim and then send him out of the room and start around here. What color was Jim's hat? What color was... Everybody's going to have a different perspective. Does that mean that you're forgetful? No. We all have our own built-in ways that we observe. Some of us are trained to observe better than others. There may be somebody in this room that ID him to a T. But science is not questionable. It's a fact. More reliance on circumstantial evidence oftentimes has to happen if you don't have science. The potential for fewer plea agreements resulting in more trials. That's costly. Because if I know I've done it and they got the science on me, what's the odds? Okay, I'll take that plea agreement. I don't want to go through all this. But if you don't have that, you may well have more trials. And I did some calculations here for a budget hearing a couple years ago. I asked a couple judges, I talked to a prosecutor's office. I said, if you start to pick a jury on Monday and maybe got into the second day, what's a low ball figure? $5,000. Okay, and that's, $5,000. Well, we do anywhere from 12 to 14,000 cases a year. So again, I'm going to low ball this. Let's take half of the cases we do, 6,000. What's 6,000? Times 5,000 if they plead to that scientific result. I think you'll find that's $30 million. And I always look at that as saved to you, the taxpayer, because those people didn't ask for a full-blown, those are costly, correct?
Yes.
And time-consuming. So a person has a right to a trial. We do 12 to 14,000 cases we complete in our lab. We have, right now, because of funding issues, we have 60. We're supposed to have about 69. State Police Lab has about 180 people. They do about 17,000 cases, but they have 91 counties. They have to travel for court. We walk across the street to court or 4 blocks away to federal court. So we don't have that. And we have a great relationship with the court. They'll call us like 5 minutes before. So that helps us, get those kind of things done. Yes, ma'am.
You answered my question. I wanted to know if you did tip to tip of the state.
Yeah, the state police has all 91 counties.